No one noticed when the maid slipped an extra piece of bread into the child's pocket. In that house, no one ever noticed her at all. She moved quietly through the halls, cleaned the floors, washed the dishes, and kept her head down. But that small, secret act would later change the fate of the entire family in ways no one could have imagined. The mansion stood on the edge of the city, tall, cold, and perfectly polished. It belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the region, a name people whispered with respect and fear. Power lived inside those walls. Money decided everything there, everything except kindness. That was something money had never managed to buy. The maid had been working there for years. Her life had taught her how to survive with little, how to stretch a meal, how to ignore hunger when necessary. She knew the signs of an empty stomach because she had lived with one for most of her life. That's why she noticed the child. He was small for his age, quiet, and always kept to the corners of the house. Unlike the other children who visited the mansion, he didn't laugh loudly or demand attention. He didn't throw tantrums or complain. He watched. He waited. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he stared at the food trays with a hunger he tried hard to hide. At first, the maid told herself it wasn't her place. The family was rich. Surely the child was fed well. Surely someone else was responsible. But day after day she noticed the same signs. The way he lingered near the kitchen. The way he drank water slowly, as if trying to fill a space food should have occupied. The way his eyes followed every plate that passed by. One evening, while clearing the dining room, she saw him standing alone by the doorway. The family had finished dinner. Plates were scraped clean. Servants rushed to clean up. And there he was, silent, invisible. Something tightened in her chest. Without thinking too much, she wrapped a piece of bread in a napkin and slipped it into her apron. Later, when no one was watching, she knelt down beside him and quietly pressed it into his hand. He looked up at her in surprise, then fear, as if worried he'd done something wrong. "Eat," she whispered. Slowly. He didn't speak. He just nodded and held the bread like it was something precious. That moment should have ended there. But it did, and single quotes d. From that day on, it became a secret ritual. A boiled egg hidden in a pocket, a piece of fruit left near the stairs, a small bowl of soup passed quietly when the kitchen was empty. The maid knew the risk. If caught, she could lose her job. But she also knew what hunger felt like, and she refused to let a child suffer silently if she could help. What she didn't know was who the child really was. In that house, secrets were common. Power thrived on silence. The child was rarely spoken to, rarely acknowledged. The servants assumed he was a distant relative, maybe the son of someone who had fallen out of favor. No one asked questions. Questions were dangerous in that place. The boy never complained. He never demanded more. He accepted the food with gratitude so deep it made the maid's heart ache. Sometimes he whispered, "Thank you." Sometimes he just smiled. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he saved half of it for later. Here's where the story begins to change. One night, the maid noticed the boy coughing badly. His face was pale, his hands were cold. She found him sitting on the floor near the servants' corridor, too weak to stand. Panic rose in her chest. She knew the rules. Servants were not to interfere with family matters, especially not with children they were not assigned to, but hunger had already crossed that line. She brought him water. She wrapped him in a spare shawl. She stayed with him until his breathing slowed. And in that quiet moment, the boy looked at her and said something that made her freeze. "My father doesn't know," he whispered. She asked what he meant, gently. Carefully, "He doesn't know I'm here," the boy said. "They said it was better this way?" Those words echoed in her mind long after she returned to her room that night. Who was his father? Why didn't he know? Why was a child living in a mansion, hungry and hidden? From that moment on, the maid realized this wasn't just about food. This was about neglect, about power, about a child being erased inside his own family. Days later, she overheard something she was never meant to hear. Two senior staff members whispering near the study. They spoke about inheritance, about documents, about a child who must remain out of sight until the right time, about a will that could change everything. Her heart started pounding. Pieces began to fall into place: the quiet boy, the secrecy, the hunger, the isolation. The maid didn't know the full truth yet, but she knew one thing for certain: this child was important. More important than anyone realized. And someone wanted him weak, quiet, and forgotten that night as she slipped food to him. Again, she looked at his face more closely than ever before. Not just as a hungry child, but as someone whose future was being controlled by people far more powerful than either of them, and she had no idea that her small acts of kindness were already interfering with a plan carefully designed by greed. The maid tried to act normal the next morning, but her hands trembled as she worked. The words she had overheard wouldn't leave her mind. Inheritance, documents, a child kept hidden on purpose. Every time she passed the long hallway where the boy usually sat quietly, her chest tightened with worry. Kindness had already pulled her into something far bigger than she had ever intended. The boy was waiting near the window when she saw him again. He looked a little stronger than before, but there was still something fragile about him, like a candle flame that could be blown out at any moment. She handed him a small piece of fruit, and he accepted it with the same careful gratitude. "Did you sleep?" she asked softly. He nodded, then hesitated. "They were angry last night," he whispered. Her heart skipped. "Who was angry?" "The people who talk in low voices," he said. "They don't like when I come out." That was enough to confirm her fears. Someone was watching him. Someone was controlling where he went, what he did, and possibly whether he ate at all. As days passed, the maid noticed changes in the house. Doors that were once left open were now locked. Guards appeared more frequently near the back corridors. Staff were warned to stay out of certain areas. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The house was tightening around the boy like a trap. Then, one afternoon, something happened that changed everything. The maid was called to clean the study, a room servants rarely entered. Papers were spread across the desk, some carelessly left open. She worked quickly, eyes lowered, until a familiar name caught her attention, the boy's name. Written clearly at the top of a legal document. Below it were words she didn't fully understand. But one phrase stood out clearly. Sole heir. Her breath caught in her throat. The child wasn't just important. He was the rightful heir to the entire family fortune. Her mind raced. If the boy was the heir, why was he treated like a burden? Why was he hungry, hidden, and isolated? The answer terrified her. If he remained weak, sick, or invisible, someone else would benefit. Someone else was waiting. That night, the boy didn't appear at his usual spot. Panic crept in slowly at first, then all at once. She searched quietly, pretending to clean, checking corners, hallways, stairwells, nothing. Her heart pounded louder with every empty space. Finally, she found him in a small storage room, curled up on the floor, shaking. "They said I ate too much," he whispered through tears. "They said I don't need it." Something broke inside her then. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, final decision. She sat beside him, ignoring every rule she had ever followed. She gave him water, food, and warmth. And for the first time, she spoke the truth she had been holding back. "You matter," she said, "more than they want you to believe." He looked at her with wide eyes. "Do you think my father would care?" The question hit her harder than anything else. "I think," she said carefully, "that he was never told the truth." From that moment on, the maid understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about feeding a hungry child. This was about protecting him long enough for the truth to come out. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. 2 days later, she was summoned by the house manager. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "There have been irregularities," he said. "Food missing, areas accessed without permission." She felt her stomach drop. She denied nothing, but she said little. Silence, she knew, could be as dangerous as confession. That evening, the boy was gone again. This time, she didn't search quietly. She followed the sound of raised voices to a locked wing of the house. She shouldn't have been there. She knew that. But fear pushed her forward. Behind the door, she heard someone say, "He's getting stronger." This wasn't supposed to happen, another voice replied colder. Then we move faster. Her blood ran cold. They were running out of time. She backed away slowly, heart racing. She had no power, no money, no influence. But she had one thing they didn't expect: knowledge and a conscience that refused to stay quiet. That night, she wrote a letter. She didn't know if it would reach the right hands, but she addressed it to the one person who could change everything. The boy's father, the head of the family, the man whose name commanded respect across the city. She wrote simply, about hunger, about secrecy, about a child hidden in plain sight. Then she waited. Days passed. The tension in the house grew unbearable. The boy was kept under closer watch. The maid was warned, watched, tested. Every act of kindness now carried real danger. And then one morning, black cars pulled into the driveway. Everything stopped. The house that had thrived on silence suddenly filled with urgency. Voices echoed, doors opened. Footsteps rushed. The boy was brought out of hiding, and for the first time, the maid saw fear not in the child's eyes, but in the eyes of the people who had controlled him. The moment the black cars stopped in front of the mansion, the entire atmosphere changed. Servants froze where they stood. Guards straightened nervously. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. No one asked questions, but everyone knew one thing. Someone important had arrived, and nothing would be the same again. The boy was standing in the hallway when it happened, holding his hands together the way he always did when he was unsure. The maid watched from a distance, her heart pounding. So loudly she was sure others could hear it. She didn't know if her letter had reached the right person. She didn't know if she had just made things worse. All she knew was that there was no turning back now. The front door opened and a man stepped inside. Tall, well-dressed, with a presence that instantly commanded silence. His face was calm, but his eyes scanned the room sharply, taking everything in. This was the father, the head of the family, the man whose name carried power. His gaze stopped on the boy for a moment. The house seemed to hold its breath. The boy looked up, confused, unsure why everyone had suddenly gone quiet. He didn't recognize the man. How could he? He had only seen him from afar, in photographs, in passing shadows. But something inside him shifted, like a memory he didn't know he had. The man took a slow step forward, then another. His expression changed, confusion turning into shock, then something far deeper, recognition. "That's not possible," he said quietly. No one spoke. "Where has he been?" the man asked, his voice still controlled, but tight. Eyes shifted. No one answered. The maid felt her legs shake, but she forced herself to step forward. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, but she remembered the boy's question. "Do you think my father would care?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He's been here the whole time." The man turned to her. "Explain," and she did. She spoke of hunger, of hidden meals, of locked rooms and whispered conversations, of a child kept weak and invisible. She expected to be interrupted, punished, silenced, but none of that happened. The man listened. As the truth unfolded, the color drained from his face. Anger didn't explode outward, it hardened inward, cold and focused. He turned slowly toward the staff members who had controlled the house in his absence. "Is this true?" he asked. No one denied it. The boy stood frozen, unsure what was happening, but sensing that something important was unfolding around him. The man knelt down in front of him, eye level now, power forgotten. "Why didn't anyone tell me you were hungry?" he asked softly. The boy hesitated, then answered honestly. "They said it didn't matter." That was the moment everything broke. Orders were given immediately. Lawyers were called. Documents were brought forward. The truth was undeniable. The child was the rightful heir. And there had been a plan to delay, weaken, and erase him quietly, but plans built on cruelty have one flaw. They depend on silence. The boy was taken out of the mansion that same day. Not hidden this time, but protected. Doctors examined him, proper meals were given, warm clothes, gentle words, things he had never known he was allowed to have. And the maid? She was dismissed from her duties. For a moment, she thought the worst had happened. That kindness had cost her everything, but before she could leave the property, the man stopped her. You fed my son, he said. When no one else did, she lowered her eyes. I just did what anyone should. No, he replied. You did what no one else dared. He offered her a choice. Compensation, protection, a position beyond anything she had ever imagined. But what mattered most to her wasn't money or status. It was the boy. Will he be okay? She asked. The man nodded. Because of you. Weeks passed. The mansion changed. Some people were gone. Others were careful, quiet. The truth had a way of reshaping everything it touched. A boy grew stronger. His laughter filled rooms that had once felt cold. He learned without fear, ate without guilt, slept without locking doors. One afternoon, he asked a question that made everyone stop. Where is she? He asked. The maid was invited back. Not as someone invisible, but as someone honored. When he saw her, he ran to her without hesitation and hugged her tightly. You didn't forget me, he said. She smiled through tears. Never, the story spread quietly, then widely. Not as a scandal, but as a lesson. That power without compassion destroys itself. That small acts matter. That feeding a hungry child can change the course of an entire family. And here is the final truth. The maid never knew she was feeding an heir. She never expected gratitude, reward, or recognition. She acted because hunger is universal and kindness doesn't ask for permission. In the end, it wasn't wealth that saved the child. It wasn't status or authority. It was a piece of bread, slipped quietly into a small hand, and sometimes that is enough to change everything.